Deep down in my heart, I kept saying that this fella's gone, you know? It'd be a miracle if he pulled out of it.
It's a miracle that I lived. If it wasn't for Mickey and Joe and Mr. DeFinis, who did the CPR for me, I wouldn't be here right now.
Just 5 months after a heart attack that nearly killed him, Paul Scher of Wilson, Connecticut, is back on his bike. He's alive today because the people with Paul, when he had his attack, knew CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Through Paul's story and others like it, you can learn how to save a life too. The day Paul had his heart attack, he was water skiing with friends. One of them was Joe Lametta.
I had taken my second run, and Paul took his second run, and Mickey was out skiing. And Paul started complaining of a slight pain in his chest. It got so intense that we shot in as fast as we could.
I got out of the boat at the dock, got into Mickey's truck, and that's the last thing I remember. I woke up in the intensive care unit a couple of days later.
I asked my son-in-law, what's that vehicle doing with the lights on? He's not moving, you know, he's stopping me.
Auto mechanic Fred DeFinis was also at the dock that evening.
And he told me, he says, I don't know, they got some problems and somebody's hurt or... So, you know, with that, I parked my vehicle and I went out and took a look. When I got there on the seat, he was just like his eyes were dilating, just looked like a dead person. There was no life to him at all. I looked for a movement, you know, the movement of the chest, or I put my ear down, listened for breathing. Wasn't breathing. I listened for heartbeat, no heartbeat. I felt for a pulse, I couldn't feel anything. I couldn't see no motion at all.
Mick ran to the phone, and Paul was in bad shape, couldn't breathe.
At that time, Joe started breathing into his mouth. I placed my hand on his middle section and started pumping on him.
He was on top of Paul, and he was just going at him so strong. He was really doing what you were supposed to do with CPR. But he said, you know, I'm going to continue it. You continue what you're doing.
I just kept going, just tried it. I think I even told Joe, I said, Joe, we got nothing to lose. Let's keep, you know, let's do what we can.
Although Fred and Joe had no formal training in CPR, they learned enough about it from what they'd read or seen in films to keep Paul alive. During a crucial 10 to 15 minutes before the ambulance arrived, Fred and Joe kept oxygen in Paul's lungs and blood pumping to his brain. Paul awoke from a coma 36 hours later.
When I did get the news, my wife was sitting there. I was having dinner, supper, whatever, and I had tears in my eyes. I really did. I was so glad for him.
More than 25,000 people die of heart attacks in New York City each year. Of those, about half die before reaching the hospital. Many of them would be alive today if someone had been there to help sooner. The average response time for an ambulance in this city is about 10 minutes. Without oxygen, the brain begins to die after only 4 minutes. Although there isn't much that can be done about New York traffic, there is something that can be done to improve the chances of people who need emergency help, and that's for more of us to learn CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Cardio for heart, pulmonary for lungs or breathing, and resuscitation for keeping both these vital life functions going until professional help arrives. I'm James Earl Jones. Too many emergencies end in tragedy simply because there's no one around who knows what to do. The truth is, we should all know CPR. It's about time we learned. In this film, we're going to teach you CPR. By watching carefully, you may learn to save a life. During the film, you'll follow a classroom course. You'll also meet more people like those we met at the beginning. People whose stories are dramatic testimony that CPR saves lives. So as you watch, try to concentrate, repeat instructions to yourself, imagine performing each step. Follow the experiences of the stories as if you are saving a life. By the end of the film, you could know CPR. One day, you may even save a life. And if you do, chances are the life you save will be that of someone you know and care about.
Hello, I'm Ed Stapleton. Welcome to the CPR course. As you know, CPR is a skill you may have to
Let's
use
begin by
someday on
joining a
somebody you know
CPR class.
or somebody you
Ed
love.
Stapleton,
So
a
it's very
paramedic who has
important
saved many
to
lives using
practice
CPR, demonstrates the technique.
First question we have is, what is CPR? And simply stated, CPR is a skill that assures oxygenation to the brain.
Though
Today, you're
CPR
gonna learn a
can be
very
done by
important
two
skill
people,
that you may
we'll
have to
concentrate
use
here
someday
on how to do it by
family member or
yourself.
friend. For purposes of remembering, we divide CPR into three parts, A, B, and C. And in each part, we assess and act upon a particular problem. In A, airway, we assess whether a person is conscious and, if necessary, provide a clear air passage. In B, breathing, we assess whether a person is breathing and, if necessary, provide mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. In C, circulation, we assess whether the person has a pulse and, if necessary, provide cardiac compressions. Now, first we'll demonstrate all three parts of CPR. And by the way, we always practice CPR on a mannequin. Please don't go home and practice on your cousins or uncles. So let's set the stage for a second. We're all at a party, and my Aunt Marion's with me, and suddenly she collapses to the floor. This is how I would react in that instance. Are you okay? 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 Help! Help! Somebody
As you
help.
watch, imagine yourself performing the steps of CPR.
Not breathing. No pulse. Call 911. Get an ambulance, quick. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, 9 and 10 and 11 and 12 and 13 and 14 and 15. One and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, 9 and 10 and 11 and 12 and 13 and 14 and 15. Okay, so what you just saw were all three parts of CPR. A, airway, B, breathing, C, circulation. Now, in some instances, when a person faints or becomes unconscious, they may only need A, airway.
I was frightened, and I was hoping that someone else would be able to do something. But as I looked around, there was absolutely no one else, so I figured that it had to be me, or we didn't know what would happen to Barbara.
Eileen Keneally, an employee of Swiss Air at Kennedy International Airport, saved a life because she knew CPR. The life she saved was that of a co-worker, Barbara Murray Fisher. Their story demonstrates that CPR is not just for heart attacks. Usually, when an unconscious person is not breathing, it's because the throat is blocked by the tongue. Barbara remembers the day she fell unconscious.
It was towards the end of the evening. In a way, I was looking forward to the next 2 hours because everybody would be gone from my end of the room. It's nice and quiet and you can get a lot done. And I'd had mild chest pains on and off all day. And the chest pains didn't become more severe. It's just that I suddenly became very, very dizzy. And I tried to put my head down on the desk, and that's all I remember.
Eileen was also working late that day, several offices away. She had been trained in CPR through a Swiss Air training program only months before.
It was about 6 o'clock, and one of the girls from Barbara's department had come in to ask if I remembered any of my CPR. And I thought she was doing a crossword puzzle. And then she said, no, I think Barbara really needs you. So I went with another fellow from reservations down to Barbara's department to see what was wrong. And one of the fellows from the office found her laying face down on the floor. So I knelt beside her, and I turned her over, and her face was blue. I remembered to open the airway and to look, listen, and feel. And then when I was trying to remember what to do next, she started to come around.
Well, let's look at this airway cross-section and understand that when a person is in an unconscious state, the head tilts forward and the tongue falls against the back of the throat. This prevents oxygen from entering the mouth and nose and going down into the lungs. So what I did was tilt the head way back and lift the jaw. This brought the tongue away from the back of the throat and allowed oxygen to enter the lungs. Now let's look at this on Aunt Marion. With one hand on the forehead and my fingers along the bony part of the jaw, I tilted the head way back and lifted the jaw to the point where the teeth were almost touching, but the mouth was not completely closed. Then I looked, listened, and felt for breathing. It's important to use all three senses since breathing is a very subtle process. Now, in this instance, Aunt Marion took a big, deep breath, so all I had to do was maintain an open airway and make sure that an ambulance was called.
Imagine yourself in Eileen's place. She knew an open airway was crucial. With one hand on Barbara's forehead, she tilted Barbara's head way back and gently but firmly lifted her chin.
I admire Eileen that she had the presence of mind to do what she did. I mean, I can't imagine what would happen to somebody if they were left that way, face down and turning blue. You know, how blue can you get before it's all over? So I'm very grateful to her.
Okay, so now let's see the whole thing. Are you okay?
Tap and shout.
Are you okay?
Call for help.
Help! Somebody help!
Tilt the head way back and lift the chin with your fingers. Look, listen, and feel for breathing.
Okay, she is breathing. Call 911. Get an ambulance right away. Call 911. Okay, so in this instance, she only needed a airway. What if she wasn't breathing?
The church people were all standing around, and they had begun to cry. They felt as if they were losing her, or they had lost her, because it just looked like instant death.
The Sabbath. Alice Bailey joins the congregation at the Victory Tabernacle in New York City as usual. But she remembers another Sabbath that was not so ordinary.
We have a communion service every quarter. I hadn't been feeling too well during the week, but I didn't want to miss it. I came out and I sat in the back because I wasn't feeling too well. And someone said, well, come up a little closer. I moved up about 2 pews. And from then on, I don't know what happened. I don't know anymore.
I was sitting about 3 or 4 pews ahead.
Vesta Nurse, a member of the congregation.
I remember hearing, like, you know, rustling when people moving about. And so I looked back to see what it was all about. And all I can remember is seeing Sister Bailey with this ashen color. And as I looked, I heard that big sigh, like...
I was sitting a few rows behind her.
Virginia Harewood, another church member.
Against the wall. And someone turned around and said, Virginia, look. And as I looked, she had just collapsed. And she looked as though she was not breathing, and she was certainly in danger. So I hopped around somehow and got over to her, and I was shaking her to see if she was all right. Sister Bailey, are you all right? Sister Bailey, are you all right? And there was no response. They tell me that Vesta must have climbed over all the pews.
How I got over, I don't know. All I know is that I got there, and I had to go there fast.
Vesta said, let's lay her down. And we laid her down, and she began to give her an airway.
Once we laid her down, I bent over, and I didn't see any movement of the chest, and I didn't feel any breaths when I leaned over her. So I did, you know, as we tilt the head back, pinched the nose, and I gave her breaths. Then looked to see if any reaction and felt the pulse. And at that time, it was there, weak, but it was there. And that's when, you know, I saw the lips started to get a little more pink.
And I was just preparing to do some compressions if necessary. But then Vesta said, just a minute, I think she's all right. And she was beginning to stir, and then she reached up to fix her hair. And so I said, well, this is it. I think that she's all right, coming around.
Okay, in this instance, she is not breathing. So while maintaining an open airway, I pinched the nose so that air won't escape during mouth-to-mouth breathing. Now, while maintaining an open airway and a pinched nose, I seal my mouth around Aunt Marion's mouth and provide 2 full breaths while watching for chest rise. Now, that's important since chest rise is your only indicator of effective breathing. Now we go into the next stage of assessment, and that is checking the pulse. Now, the pulse we use in CPR is the pulse in the neck, the carotid pulse. And I want everybody to locate their Adam's apple. Okay. Now slide in the groove. between the Adam's apple and the muscle in the neck. Now, everybody should feel their carotid pulse. If you don't, you better call 911. Okay, now let's see that on Aunt Marion. I locate the Adam's apple and come into the groove between the Adam's apple and the muscle on the neck. Now, in this instance, there is a pulse. So all I have to do is provide one breath every 5 seconds to provide a continuous supply of oxygen.
Completely surround the victim's open mouth with yours and make a tight seal to be sure each breath goes fully into the lungs.
Of course, I'm eternally grateful to Vesta and Virginia and to all the other members of the church because they were all praying for my recovery. I feel eternally grateful to them because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be here now.
Now, let's see the whole thing from the beginning. Are you okay? Are
Tap
you
and
okay?
shout.
Are you okay? Are you okay? Help, help.
Open the
somebody help.
airway and assess for breathing. Look, listen, and feel.
Not breathing.
2 full breaths, 1 to 1.5 seconds each. Then check the pulse. Take enough time to be sure you feel it.
There is a pulse. Call 911. She's not breathing. Call 911.
After sending someone to call an ambulance, give 1 breath every 5 seconds, remembering to pinch the nostrils to keep air from escaping. Periodically, check the pulse.
Okay, she has a pulse. So in this instance, she needed A, airway, B, breathing. What would I have done if she didn't have a pulse?
Normally, I have to speak to the carriers about keeping quiet. That morning, I didn't have to say a word. You could hear a pin drop that morning when Bob went down. And it brought about the reality that, to me and to them, that this life that we have is a fragile thing. And you better do all you can to protect it.
Bob Goss, 49 years old, a husband and a father. When he had his heart attack, he was among the more than 1.5 million people to suffer heart attacks that year. Unlike many of them, Bob survived and continues to lead a full life. The reason is CPR.
The only thing I do remember is getting out of bed, getting dressed, to get a little breakfast. My wife dropped me off at the post office here, and she said I'd see her. That's all I remember.
The man who saved Bob's life is John Dent, supervisor of station and branch operations for the post office in Trenton, New Jersey, where both he and Bob work. John recalls what happened.
The morning started out as a regular day. I happened to be in the office at the time, and I heard a loud thud. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what. So I ran out of the office and around to the corner, and I saw that Bob was in a slumped position against his case. I ran up to him. I tried to communicate with him, asked him if he was all right, and he didn't speak. We stretched him out. I bent his head back to form what they call an airway, so you can breathe it so the tongue doesn't fall back. In the meantime, I saw that he had no pulse. I felt that I couldn't feel a pulse, and he didn't appear to be breathing. And his color looked like it was changing to me. So I thought, well, he's having a heart attack. So I went to compressions, hands in position over his chest, 15 compressions, 2 breaths, 15 compressions, 2 breaths, 15 compressions, 2 breaths.
In this instance, there is no pulse. So first, we position ourselves close to Aunt Marion to give compressions. Now, next thing we have to do is locate the correct hand position for compression. So I want everybody to feel the lower margin of their rib cage with their middle and index finger. Then come along the margin of the rib cage to the bottom of the breastbone. Now, I'll show you that on Aunt Marion. I take 2 fingers along the lower margin of the rib cage and come up to the bottom of the breastbone. I then take the heel of my other hand and place it just next to those fingers on the center of the breastbone with the fingers up. I do not let my fingers rest on the rib cage. Now, when I compress, I'm going to compress approximately 1.5 to 2 inches at a rate of 80 to 100 compressions per minute. Your arms should be locked, and there should be a straight line from your shoulders down to the center of the breastbone. When you compress, you should count to maintain the rate. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and
Ed's
6
count
and
helps
7
him maintain a
and 8,
rate
9,
faster
10,
than 1 compression
11,
per second.
12, 13 and 14 and 15. I then quickly come down, open the airway, pinch the nose, and give 2 full breaths. Then back up, again locate my correct position for compressions. I then provide 15 compressions and 2 breaths for 4 cycles. Then I check the pulse. It's important to check the pulse at this point, since if the pulse returns, it will usually occur early on. Now, if there is no pulse, I would continue the cycle of 15 compressions and 2 breaths until such time that the ambulance arrives.
Doing compressions can be hard work. John Dent had to continue the cycle of 15 compressions and 2 breaths for about 15 minutes until professional help arrived.
I'm really proud when I see that I could have been a part in helping Bob survive. It just gives me a feeling, especially for a guy that had never done anything big in his life. You see, nothing really big in his life. And I really, well, I love the guy now, that's all. That's about it.
Feelings mutual.
Okay, so let's go over the whole procedure one more time.
As Ed gives this final demonstration, picture yourself performing CPR.
Help, somebody help.
Lift the chin and tilt the head way back to open the airway. Assess for breathing. Look, listen, and feel.
Not breathing.
Give 2 full, slow breaths, then check the pulse.
No pulse. Call 911. Get an ambulance.
Locate the correct place on the chest. Lock your elbows and begin.
1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, 7 and 8.
Remember to keep your fingers off the chest.
12 and 13 and 14 and 15.
Count 15 compressions, followed by 2 breaths. Always locate the correct hand position.
1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10, 11 and 12 and 13 and 14 and 15.
Pinch the nose. Make a tight mouth-to-mouth seal.
1 and
Keep
2,
your arms straight
3,
and your shoulders
4,
directly
5,
over the victim,
6,
the most
7,
effective position
8,
for the hard work
9,
of compressions.
10, 11 and 12 and
Fingers
13
off the
and
chest.
14 and 15. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, 9,
Count
10,
to maintain the
11
rhythm.
and 12 and 13 and 14 and 15.
4 times through the cycle of 15 compressions and 2 breaths. Then check again for a pulse.
Still no pulse.
If no pulse, continue CPR until help arrives.
Okay, so what you saw were all 3 parts of CPR. A, airway. B, breathing. C, circulation.
The tools to save a life are in your hands, so use them. Don't be shy. If you're at the scene of an emergency, take the first step. Tilt the victim's head back, open the airway. That may be enough. If not, remember the ABCs and let them be your guide. Even if you don't perform CPR perfectly, do the best you can, but do something. The alternative may be unthinkable. The result may be the most rewarding experience of your life.
Maybe you can't bring him back, but you can buy some time for the individual until qualified help gets here.
I looked to the fellow that was with me, hoping maybe that he would help me, but everyone just stood there, and nobody, did anything. So, I guess I knew it was up to me.
I'm just so thankful that I knew what to do at the proper time and that I was able to move. Some people become paralyzed in an emergency situation. And I just thank God that I was in the right place at the right time.
You just never know when it's going to happen or to who. And if you're in a situation like that and you're available to help somebody, to give them CPR, to maintain their life, if you can do so, that's a good thing for everybody.
CPR is easy to learn. There are slightly different methods for giving CPR to infants and children. If you want to know more about cardiopulmonary resuscitation, Call your local heart association.
Fred? How you doing?
Hey, Paul.
How you doing?
Geez.
This is the guy who did it, huh? I finally get to meet you.
How you doing?
Real good.
Did you work out?
I'm going to do 3 miles now.
Good boy.